Welcome to the last episode of the Riga Security Forum 2025. Today is going to be a very special episode. We will not talk about the geopolitics, about the 28-point plan, 19-point plan, supplies of the weapons, or any of the agreements that the previous US administration or the present one has made with Ukraine, or the promises that the Europeans have made and delivered or not towards Ukraine. And here, in Central Eastern Europe, for many decades, we have spoken about the sources of adversities and destruction and natural destruction of the history. If the 21st century started bad, went worse, and then improved for the next century to seemingly bring new opportunities for the humanity, we can see that a couple of countries have tried and reinvented themselves, like, for example, the German-French relationship is no more dwelling on animosity, but such countries as Russia have remained militarily oriented to recapture everything that has been lost to the collapse of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. Today, however, I don't want to talk about the geopolitics, the support, the military supplies, the humanitarian support that Europeans should be sending more to Ukraine in order for Ukraine to defend itself against the military aggression now. For more than 4 years against the Russian aggression, full-scale war, but even before, since 2014, hybrid warfare, a little green man that the Europeans failed to recognize as Russian soldiers for more than a year into conflict, and other instances against Georgians, against others. But Ukraine is a pivotal point, and also the main concern for the Baltic security, for the Nordic states. When I meet many Hungarians, Slovaks, Czechs, or Poles, we don't have to explain why we feel the same. It is the same also with the Georgians, Ukrainians, Estonians, and Latvians. We all have ties that bind us, even though there is little when it comes to commercial cooperation or anything else. The historical memory and the lessons that we have learned from the Russian oppression over the years is painful. And it is the reason for adversity and concern in Latvia and Ukraine, but also and especially among the Ukrainians and Latvians and other people living abroad in Ukraine, and those who are trying to help Ukraine with anything that they have. Today I'm really privileged to introduce two excellent speakers to my right, remotely. Aliona Hlivco, she is former Ukrainian politician, Ukrainian-British political scientist, and the founder of the St. James Foreign Policy Foundation. And to my left is my good friend, brother in arms, Juris Ulmanis, who is a strong supporter of Ukraine. He has written a couple of books, and one of those is entitled When War is Personal. So probably he has spent more time in Ukraine than in Latvia trying to help Ukrainians to defend, provide medical support and different kinds of supplies to the front, anything that Ukrainians need. In the meantime, probably Aliona has a more challenging task. While she is residing in one of the countries that have been the most supportive, especially at the outset of the war, it is becoming increasingly difficult to remind about the history and the lessons that we have not learned from the past. And she has a really challenging task to explain the real situation, what is going on the front line, what is the situation in Ukraine, what Ukrainians should not accept in order to make sure we don't repeat the same questions of the past. I would like to give the floor to Aliona first to explain how difficult is your job, how do you feel as a Ukrainian in the UK, and how do you see the evolving patterns and changes in Ukraine over these years?
Thank you, Sandis. I think as everywhere in Europe, it started really well with a huge outpour of support for Ukraine, which was really surprising even to me because I've lived in London since 2018, late 2017. And of course, having arrived there as a former politician, as you mentioned, nobody really knew what that meant, where Ukraine was, why it was relevant at all. It was somewhere, everything beyond Poland, the EU, was a little bit of unknown territory for the Brits. And all of a sudden in 2022, there's this huge uproar about the invasion of Ukraine. Now people know very well where it is. Every single city in Ukraine that's in the news, everyone's practicing their pronunciation of our Ukrainian cities and towns, which is a tough call for the Brits. But they're trying really hard. So I was surprised by the outpouring of this support from the Brits. And at first it really puzzled me why they were so on board with a country that's so far away and really that they know little about, to quote the classics. Every single household that I saw, every window, every government building had a Ukrainian flag in its window. It wasn't just the support of the government and the institutions and the NGOs who started fundraising and donating whatever they could. The volunteer center, where I volunteered for the first, I think, month of the invasion after war, it was always full of people. Everyone was bringing literally everything they had, including half-used lip balms and, open packs of ibuprofen. People were literally bringing everything they had from their homes. So it was really nice and refreshing to see. But of course, the sentiments, just like human emotions, they don't last very long. And that support has been a sine wave for most of the last almost 4 years now. It would regularly go up and down. And you can't really blame people for that because they all have their lives to live. They have their challenges here. They do suffer from attacks and repercussions, perhaps, for their support for Ukraine. So that often takes up the media. There's, of course, hybrid war, as you mentioned. There's loads of dis and misinformation that's pouring into Britain on a daily basis, but we'll go into that in more detail. In summary, I would say that the British support is still there. So I walk around Westminster every day, and it's still really heartwarming to see Ukrainian flags flying on all government buildings. It's unprecedented. I've never seen anything like that before, and for that, I will forever be grateful to the Brits, where the Ministry of Defense, the Foreign Office, Ministry of Justice, they're all flying Ukrainian flags to this day. At the same time, what I'm noticing recently is not so much decline of support of people, and I think I would differentiate that and put that into separate categories. One, the people of the UK, and two, the government and the policymakers. When it comes to the people, I still feel the same level of support, compassion, and empathy coming for Ukrainians every time somebody sees me or learns for the first time that I'm Ukrainian. There's always a very sincere expression of caring for Ukraine, of asking genuine questions. Everybody who knows me, my friends, every single time the conversation begins with "How's your brother?" and "How are you?" So nobody ever forgets that there's still war going on, and then it's really important in terms of human dimension, something that we will talk about now. At the same time, as I mentioned, the hybrid war keeps waging on. The problems keep rolling in. Economically, Britain is not in the best place it's ever been. There's a very, very little growth in the economy, especially based on the budget that was just announced earlier this week. There's just not much prospect for Britain to be very positive about life, and then constant balancing between the United States and reinvention of itself after leaving the EU. All of that weighs in heavily on Britain. And of course, there's always this far-right party speculating on immigration and foreigners and stoking racism. And there's far-left parties that are emerging now who are also for isolationism, for very, focusing on domestic issues, but in terms of geopolitical issues and bigger picture, the world that we live in, which you can't just avoid. They're very, what I like to call them, fluffy politics, because they try to pretend as if that doesn't exist and doesn't affect Britain at all. So between all of that, people's hearts and minds are beginning to sway a little bit, but still I would say that they're quite solid. In terms of policymaking, community and the government, it's very interesting because all the commitments remain the same. the Labour government is giving as much money as the Conservative government was giving, £3 billion pounds a year. That's a huge commitment. There's a big support. There's a new UK-Ukraine drone cooperation agreement with developing the new Octopus drone that is flying on the front lines, and my brother is telling me about that very successfully. There's exchange of knowledge. There's constant training of Ukrainian troops. That said, I started hearing late last year, this time last year, I started hearing rumors in Westminster that, for example, Interflex would be moving out of the UK as the center, as the headquarter. So Britain would still donate its troops and send the troops to train Ukrainians, but elsewhere in Europe, like Northern Europe, for example. There were talks about Poland, but now I think with recent Russian drone strikes, they've achieved exactly what they set out to achieve, to scare the Western Europe away from the Eastern Europe and not to send troops even to train Ukrainian soldiers in Poland, for example. So issue of financing is high on the agenda. Interflex, as far as I hear, will stay in the UK until the end of 2026, but then I feel like it is going to move. And just very interesting dynamics in the last 2 weeks where Sir Keir Starmer has not been very vocal in Ukraine. I feel like he's taken a back seat a little bit, and he's led his European colleagues to speak out. We are seeing the second trip of President Zelensky to Paris in the last few weeks of this turmoil with negotiations and pro-Russian peace deal. Zelensky went to Paris twice. Merz was tweeting like a madman on the day when the 28-point peace plan was introduced, standing up for Europe, standing up for Ukraine. I kept checking Twitter of Prime Minister here, and there was nothing. I mean, we had Farage and his number two, Richard Tice, tweet before Starmer did anything. So I am a little bit worried about the institutional support here in the UK. I don't think there will be a huge change in terms of actions, in terms of financial support, but I'm not sure where the British government's heart is at the moment. I understand that they're grappling with a lot of challenges domestically, but it's certainly not the reason to retreat from being supportive of such an important cause like fighting the war in Europe.
Thank you so much. Like the British heart is probably, I hope, with the people, but our hearts also, like in the Baltic states, have always been with Ukraine, and you have traveled there. You have seen what's going on there. At the beginning of the war, as Aliona already said, there was a huge support from all sides. You know, it's like in the public, of course, it's still there. But over the four years, you know, it's like the mood has been changing a little bit in the Baltic states, but more in Western Europe and in more remote areas. What do you see? What is the situation in Ukraine? How different it is from Central Eastern Europe and also probably from the West, since you are also familiar with the United States, you know, it's like, and their attitude, like, of the people?
Yes. I must agree with Aliona that the support and fundraising has dwindled a little bit, not a little bit, a lot, since the war started 4 years ago. But there is a group of people, grassroots, who are still continuing because they believe in democracy and freedom, and they're still supporting Ukraine. For many people, and I've been to the United States and Canada presenting, talking about Ukraine, the war is very, very abstract. Yeah, and of course the media in the US and Canada also does not talk about Ukraine as much as they do, for example, here in Latvia, which is why those people don't really know what's going on. So it's very important that, and thank you, Sandis, and thank you, Aliona, that you're speaking out and informing everybody, because it's not that people don't want to support, it's they don't know about it. That's one issue. But going back to what you said, Sandis, yes, I came back a few days ago. I was in the western part of Ukraine, in Lviv, where, of course, it's not so dangerous. Although the day before, Lviv did experience an attack, and 130 miles away in Ternopil, they experienced a horrific attack where 26 people were murdered, including 3 children. When I was there for a week, we only experienced 2 air raids. And so it's relatively quiet. But the mood there, just walking around in the streets, is very different from what it is here in walking around in Riga. There, the mood is such that people are very somber. They're into themselves. It's not really sadness or depression, but it's almost like spiritual. And I can say that because a month ago I was in Tibet, going around this holy mountain Kailish, also where people, are deep into themselves. And I sensed a similar mood. And of course, people are very, very religious. And every morning I went to church, 8 o'clock, to morning mass in a Greek Catholic. I'm not Greek Catholic, but I went because I felt that I needed to. And you could see who was there. Who was there? Mostly older people, men and women. And as Aliona has a brother there, I could almost feel, Aliona has a brother on the front, you could feel that these people were praying for their loved ones on the front, or people or soldiers who have passed away. And it's really surreal, this feeling. In one way, it's a beautiful feeling, but in a way, it's, of course, very tragic. Every day in Lviv, funerals. Every morning at 11 o'clock, funerals of soldiers. Every day there were plaques of photos of those that have died in the war. One photo or 4 photos, but every day there were funerals. So it's an ongoing thing. And it's and people, the atmosphere there is that people will not give up. They will not give up. They will fight, as I always say, and I heard this on the first day of the war until today. They will fight to the last soldier, even with pitchfork, even if they don't have the weapons. And of course, they all say, we need weapons. And shame on us that we don't provide them the weapons, right? They're doing the dirty work for us. We don't even have to go there and fight. Yeah, they're doing all the dirty work, and we can't even supply them with weapons. So in summary, and also they're very grateful, which I was surprised about. The honorary consul of Latvia organized Latvia Days there, and that's why I was there, because I presented to a bunch of groups. And people are so grateful that they, you tell them the story about how, what you're doing and why it's important to support Ukraine. And that's why one of the things that we should be doing is going more. And people criticize, it's like a tourist trip. It's not a tourist trip. When you go to Ukraine, I always say, leave on Friday I'm talking about Riga, leave on Friday from Riga, and you can be back in Riga on Tuesday morning, but go and drive to Kiev. And what will you see? You will experience some air raids. If you're lucky, you will experience some Shahed attacks. Yeah, you will see. You can talk to people about it, and you will experience curfew. And on the side of the roads, you will see the bombed out buildings. And that will give you, I guarantee that will give you a completely different perspective on what is happening in Ukraine, and it will not be so abstract, because it's easy to watch television and say, oh my God. Yeah, while you're planning your trip, your winter ski vacation. It's crazy. It's right next door to us here in Latvia, and we're not doing enough.
Absolutely. I think one idea that caught my heart is that, you already mentioned that the people are still sympathetic. In the United States, they don't like the war, but it's abstract for them. They are concerned about egg prices. That's why they elect the president. And in Germany, they are concerned about the pension prices. And in the UK, they are concerned about their GDP decreasing 0.1% in a quarter. In Latvia, we are afraid that we will run out of the stock to supply Ukraine. But in Ukraine, as you said, like the funeral in Lviv, in the most remote part of and then you go deeper, and then the fear is different. And you can see also the people on the streets, it's like those who have lost limbs, but still smile because they are alive and with their families. But the fear in the front line is different. It is basically, without discrimination, the bullets kill, and the death is there. And I love the way you said, you don't say conflict, you say war, and you don't say died, they were killed. The question is like about murder, yeah. killed, murdered by the butcher in Kremlin by the Russian soldiers. You mentioned disinformation. To what extent are we allowed to tell the story as it is in the UK or in the West? To what extent is the information there about the front line? Because I remember about the first days, weeks, months, even the year in the war, there was a regular information on the television, the people talked, they felt more about what's happening in Ukraine, and it helped democratic governments to do the right thing. You said, like, in the budget line, it's still there. The question is, like, to what extent will it change? It might change incrementally as Europe do. We should do it faster. When Hitler was bracing for war, he did it quickly. Zeitenwende takes lots of time. Like with MERS, I feel that eventually plans are being more realistic, it's like, and probably will take some kind of a form. What do you think would be the right message and how to spread it? I feel Ukrainians especially, they are not allowed to tell everything how they feel and must be more apologetic than instead of like expressing your views and informing the society about the conditions as they are in the front line.
I wouldn't say necessarily that you're not allowed. Britain is a very liberal society. I think that's one thing that struck me, especially coming over from Eastern Europe, where there's, the remaining kind of post-Soviet mentality in the older generation, where you're completely in a slave mentality and put your head down, to a little bit more of conservative, traditional culture in Ukraine. I think I was pretty stunned by the level of liberalism and sometimes even libertarianism in British society. At the same time, with this freedom comes huge responsibility and a choice. So Brits can choose to listen to you, to engage with you if they want to, but if they don't, they simply turn the blind eye, and they would never even feel guilty for it, because they have the freedom to choose what to listen to, what to be compassionate about, what cause to support and what not to support. And they almost never would feel guilty for it. So I think the real challenge for me was kind of learning these cultural specificities and learning the audience and being able to speak to the audience in a way where they actually want to listen to most horrendous things, to atrocities. I think I've learned the line of how far you could go. It really depends on what's going on that specific day in the media, what's covering the mainstream news versus what's going on in Ukraine. There's, of course, we have to understand that, see, in Ukraine, there's one level of tolerance. As Juris was just explaining, Latvia, it's a little bit different because you're still covered by the NATO umbrella and you don't fight the war right now. Here in Britain, I feel like the whole generation, my generation of people, they're quite different to millennials in Ukraine or Eastern Europe. Their level of tolerance towards difficulties in life and complexity in life is way, way lower. Things like, stress at work or running late somewhere or Christmas shopping stresses them out because it's responsibility to do something or to deliver or to be viewed in the eyes of other people as a good person or a successful person, chasing careers, achieving something or not achieving something. So it's the issues that arise from a peaceful society that never really had any problems, major survival problems, in the last 50 to 80 years. Every time I think of this, I remember my late great-grandmother, who's obviously survived. She's seen the First World War, she survived the Second World War, the famine. We were in the west of Ukraine, but they still survived the famine of 46, 47, and then typhus. And she was the ultimate survivor. And every time she would see somebody getting a bit too comfortable, like our younger generation, or us complaining about life too much, now being able to get a job with a degree in early 2000s, corruption in Ukraine, all of that, even major issues for Western countries, you would always say, you need Stalin in your life. And that was like a way of her to joke, saying that you don't know what hardship is. And had you experienced that time under Stalin, the bloodiest dictator of the 20th century, you would not be complaining about these things. So we can't really put the blame on the people, just like we haven't experienced Stalin. We now have Putin, which is, the modern version, the update. We can't really blame the Brits that they don't understand and can't fully engage with what we're trying to talk about, because they've never seen, they never faced the existential survival challenge to their lives. So with that said, I must give them their due. Whenever the environment is right, and whenever there is openness, it's up to the communicator. It's our responsibility as well to choose your audience wisely, to feel the mood of the audience, to know exactly who you're talking to, what they care about, which angle of the thing you're going to talk about will get to them most. So it's not just, you need to be smart about it and you need to be responsible. You can't overstretch the tolerance of the audience, because they will shut down. It's just like with a person. You need to feel how much they could take in and take it to the very, very last limit. And I know it's not excusing them, but I'm coming out of realities, right? How to be successful, how to achieve any result of engage this audience that's very, very different to ours. They still care deeply about human stories. Whenever you come from the angle of this is what's going on, and this is the tragedy that, for example, I faced yesterday, or this is the story that my brother told me about, his experience a week ago, or this is what my friend is going through at the moment. They do engage. You also have to be a little bit careful of, for example, there's so many photos of Ukrainian, I wouldn't say influencers, because it's not really appropriate for the wartime, but there's a lot of these pages on LinkedIn and Twitter that we're seeing talking constantly about war. And I've noticed that with time, as the Western audience started to shut down, these Ukrainian channels started ramping up the level of tragedy and atrocities. And sometimes it definitely works, because people need to be just shaken and woken up and shaken out of their, kind of half asleep state most of the time. But on the other hand, what that sometimes causes is for people to completely look away. So you just lose your audience straight away if you post photos on LinkedIn, which, is a professional network for people thinking about how to progress their career and expand their network. You post photos of dead children from Ukraine, as horrific and tragic it is, laying on the ground. People will block you. They don't want to see that. And, we can judge that. We can say you can't look away because this may be coming your way if you don't react, if you don't do enough. You can't just focus on, migration narratives and on your super stressful Christmas shopping list. You can't be dreading going back to your family over Christmas because you're going to have all of your mental health issues arise from the childhood. We can't really talk to them like that. And they have the right to do it because it's their freedom. This is the essence of liberalism, and you have to respect that, whether you agree with it or not. So I'm going back to the narrative where everything is allowed, nothing is forbidden, nothing is disencouraged even. But at the same time, you really have to be smart about your communications. You have to respect the audience. You have to know the audience first and foremost. You have to respect them and their right to switch off and shut off. And only then you can slowly and very carefully find the openings where the things you can talk about, to an extent that they will accept them, still make a change. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, when there's such high competition for attention, and trust me, here in the West, you get bombarded left, right, and center with information from all screens and all social media and accounts and news and countries, that again, very often people just shut down. So you need to really, really be meticulous about it and really smart about your comms. Whether it's good or bad, history will judge that. Britain has been good to an extent. Still, I firmly believe, because I got this question at last year's London Defence Conference, what can we do about disinformation? What can we do about sustaining support for Ukraine? How can we make sure that people don't forget that there's still war in Ukraine? And when it comes to that, on the government level, within the policymaking community, it's very simple. You just need a government-based, government-led, well-financed, and well thought through strategic communication strategy. You don't have to invent the wheel. It's all been invented. Stratcoms develop and evolve as we speak, especially in the era of hybrid wars. With the advent of artificial intelligence, it will all change drastically in the next 5 years. But if you have a strategy, if the government wants people to care about certain things, it could certainly achieve that result.
Thank you very much. Probably there's one thing that frustrates me in the same way as the Brits. It's the Christmas shopping. I usually tend to write my wish list, and there are a couple of wishes we might actually share that is on the list, And of course, the level
Can I interrupt you for a second? I spoke to my very good friend in NATO, I think last week, just texting, checking in on him in Brussels. And he said to me, have you got your Christmas wish list together? Do you know what you want? And I said, yeah. You know what all Ukrainians want for Christmas? Nukes.
No, I want to my wish was to see what was stolen by 1994. Because that was also the ambassador's wish, it's like for Ukraine, that would be a sufficient security guarantee, probably, because you can't really trust treaties, agreements. We can see that all those actually have let us down, and we have to restore the trust in all the stuff that has been lost. But probably the United States and the White House or the Congress can do it. But let's
I don't think so. Sorry again for interrupting you, but I think we also, in order to be realistic and effective in our future endeavors, we must give up on expecting people to go back and respect international norms, treaties, and international law, because we're seeing that it's not being respected, not just in regards to Ukraine. The United Nations as a body needs some serious reckoning. The UN Security Council is not fit for purpose. America is bombing ships in their South American waters, and they're claiming that that's according to international law and no one can tell them anything. We're living in an age when completely new reality, including the legal realm, is reshaping, and we need to shape the new reality rather than expect that one day the old reality will finally be implemented.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. I didn't say it's a short-term wish or a long-term wish, because it's like a yesteryear when I don't believe in the United Nations. I still believe in the United States because the people are still good, but it might take time. What I wanted to hypothetically ask Juris, if my Christmas wish comes true, one or two, that is on the list, you can't talk about this to make sure that actually the Santa fulfills it before I express it loudly. You have spoken with the Ukrainian people a lot. Recently, there were Latvian days in Lviv. Mm-hmm. They share the stories to the people they want. As Aliona said, it's a freedom, right? And for the Brits and others, it's like there is a freedom to listen or not, right? And there are fewer choices in Ukraine because the freedom is very limited by the neo-Stalinist approach to the neighbors, or the Khrushchev way of dealing with the allies, or how you make the Kremlin tradition, right? When you talk to the Ukrainians, and let's hope the war ends on just terms soon, by Russia collapsing, its military being defeated, my Christmas wish becoming true. How do Ukrainians view Europe or their closest allies, the people? The Central Eastern Europe, like my former academic advisor said, has been interesting because we have a tradition, some kind of evolving, transforming tradition, and the ties that bind Ukrainians, Balts, Poles, also Scandinavians together, also the Hungarians. How do they look at Europe, for example, and the world?
Well, on a grassroots level, they are very grateful, of course. I don't know how they, I don't get into global conversations with most people because I don't think there's any point in it. But for example, if you're sitting in a cafe and I'm speaking Latvian with my colleague, they ask, what language is that? Oh, Latvian. Oh, thank you so much. We know you're doing so much for us. So they're very, very grateful. And I think while I was there last 10 days, the 47th said something like President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people are not thankful enough for his peacekeeping, what he's doing with peacekeeping. And immediately I thought to myself, well, but the United States and the 47th is not thankful to the Ukrainians and President Zelensky for saving Western civilization. So, this thankfulness, the Ukrainians are so thankful for everything that the West is doing. And there's so many volunteers, the British volunteers, and from all countries that are going and trying to do something. And I can tell you, very, very thankful. And so
I think Ukrainians should be thankful for something, for the peace deal, allowing to grab the peace from Ukraine.
Yeah,
that's nothing you should be.
It's so shameful that I'm thinking President Zelensky, he has to go around the world begging for help. Yes. I mean, it's absurd. It's completely absurd. Why does he have to do that? We should be, just in droves going there, meetings like with European politicians every week in Kyiv, saying what we're going to do, he shouldn't be going around. It's somehow it's opposite of what it should be.
Absolutely. And currently, NATO was built to defend against something, right?
Right.
Ukrainians are defending us from this something. Then we have Christmas wishes and everything, and we really want this war to end, and Ukraine's first didn't want it to start, but it was not your choice. Do you see, in the UK, do people talk about repeating the past mistakes, the Munich agreement? Is it ever mentioned by the common people, not the government and experts? Maybe 1938 pops up somewhere in the expert discussion. But is the history taught well enough in the UK to the common people? And I mean, you mentioned about your great-granny, right? My grandfather told what the Soviets did when they entered the village. They first destroyed the houses, they killed all the animals, they basically let Latvians, Estonians, Lithuanians in starvation. So we share something with the Ukrainians, not as atrocious as it was in 46 and 47, as you mentioned. It's like when people were starving and dying from starvation. But it was similar, where the Russian culture comes in, the destruction starts, and they have little innovation to offer. They have little collaboration they are ready to embrace. There's only oppression that they have been able and capable offering to any partner for the last 100 years.
Sandis, quickly about Russian culture, sorry. Yeah. In Lviv Opera House, there's a sign there. Lviv is free of the occupant's language, completely occupant language free. That was cool. Yeah, that's great.
That's cool. We should be probably learning, quickly from Lviv and Ukraine.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. I think we are talking about the culture and the way we think about the human lives, values, because what has changed during the 47th? I think there has been a tremendous shift to where the human value is very limited. Mm-hmm. The importance of the deal at any cost. How does it resemble this history and the human cost among the Brits? Because I feel they might be a little bit different than the 47th.
Go ahead, Yuri. Go ahead.
No. I don't know about the Brits, but one example is who did the 47th send now to Moscow, right? Two guys, two completely derelicts, so-called real estate business people, to make a deal. And that says something in itself about, the seriousness or unseriousness about, a peace thing in Ukraine. So, that's just one example. There's absolutely no human, those people that 47 Cents has no concept of empathy, of human, about the repercussions, about what's going to happen to people in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
So that's an example.
I mean, what Juris said, and maybe you can let us know what is the sentiment in the UK? Because Ukrainians are said with the pitchforks, right? If they run out of the bullets. We have a saying in our regiment what we do when we run out of the bullets to defend our country and our loved ones. But what is the sentiment in the Ukraine about Ukraine in the UK when they hear Ukraine will fight until the last man standing?
One great thing that I really admire about the British people is actually their extreme willingness to jump into any fight that they feel passionate about. So they would never run away from a fight. They're there. I think that's the reason why when the war started in Ukraine, they so vehemently supported Ukraine despite having very, very little ties and knowing very little about the country. I think that the shared feeling that they had was going back to the Second World War, when they feel abandoned. You know, the enemy was moving in, France already fell, the United States wasn't there. Eventually it did the right thing, again, just to quote Sir Winston, but not straight away. So they kind of felt like Ukraine is in the same position. It's almost like a kindred spirit. And, you know, there's a reason why the two task forces in the British MOD are called Kindred, and the second one is Spirit. So Task Force Kindred works on supplying Ukraine with all the weapons and hardware that it needs. Spirit works on resupplying British stockpiles and making sure that they have enough for their own. So even that speaks for great support amongst people, amongst military, amongst servicemen, in whom it's installed the sense of service, support. Many Brits would tell me that they would always stand up for the underdog, meaning the smaller party that's being attacked by a bully. They feel like they need to be there to establish justice. So those are really, really great qualities of the nation that they still portray. I think the only reason why the British government is still giving £3 billion a year to Ukraine and still was not so sure about moving Interflex this year as they initially planned, as was proposed allegedly by now the former Foreign Secretary and currently Justice Minister, allegedly, to move the Interflex out of the country because it's just too expensive. One of the reasons they didn't is because there is great support amongst people for Ukraine, because they know history, and that history has traumatized them enough, you know, under the siege and the bombardment from Nazis in the Second World War. They know what it's like. There's that historic memory in the older generation that sometimes you can still see seeping through in the younger one. As I've said, my generation, and especially Gen Z, they're a little bit different and probably a tough audience to work with. But when it comes to the foundation, it's still there. They know history. They know very well of the outcomes of Chamberlain. Very often when, for example, people are calling, you know, Donald Trump or American administration and accusing them of being like Chamberlain, that's being rebuked in the British society a little bit. Some people know history, most people know history, I would say. Some people still don't, based on, you know, your education and just your interest in history. Many are talking, you know, Chamberlain still had the best interest at heart, despite his kind of defeatism and weakness. He still wasn't trying to maliciously engage with an enemy and gain something from it. And people started comparing, for example, negotiations or American mediation in these negotiations more to Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. More similarities there of, you know, big powers agreeing on something and sacrificing everything else. And then as soon as the interests don't align, that alliance is broken up. And it results in the Second World War. So I think it's interesting. Amongst, of course, policymakers, researchers, people I speak to on a daily basis, there is this broad knowledge of history. Younger generation, not so much. But it also gives me great hope and reassurance that, again, when you put in enough effort, because I get invited to speak at academic institutions quite a lot, the beginning of the war, 2022 and 23, I was still being invited into American universities, and I'm really proud that there was a great reception of Ukrainian message and our situation in Harvard University, Georgetown, NYU, in California, in Monterey. So they still wanted to listen. They sympathized. They wanted to know more. This year, students in Britain still want to know more, still want, the prime source of information. But again, it's that values. It's when you choose your messages carefully, when you're being very authentic and honest. When you talk about weaknesses of Ukrainian society as much as the bravery, because you can't just repeat all the same, banal statements, because that also loses interest. But once you layer that on top carefully of what they already know and fill the gaps accordingly in the most sincere way, because people can also feel when you're not being sincere. Again, going back to the issue of respecting your audience, then they want to learn more, even about history, and see some analogies. And the phrase that I really love, that I keep hearing more and more recently, is history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. That's what we're living through now. That's what I'm trying to bring to British audiences and younger generation.
Yeah, I think this is a very good wrap up of all the ideas that are evolving in the United Kingdom, like Molotov-Ribbentrop. Those are the two boogeymen that we have in the Baltic states. Munich Agreement is something that we read in the history books. McCarthyism, is the paranoia looking for the communists under the bed. What is Hlivco? It kind of rhymes again, but the last name is a little bit different, and this kind of raises huge concern here in the Baltic states. And we really want Ukraine to have the same choices as we in the Baltic states. I think the history, the present, and the standing on the right side of the history is what Europe especially, and we very much hope the Americans will do very much. I can see those elements in the Republican Party to make sure that we can sustain something that we have built on. Today I would like to conclude this not geopolitical, but how we feel, where are we going, where are our friends and allies, and we very much hope that this community will sustain, be resilient as Ukraine, and we can see this level of resilience is lower in some parts of the Western community, and therefore me and Juris, we wish you all the intellectual rigor to be capable of conveying the right message in the right form to the British society, so they are supportive to Ukraine and also to the Baltic states in the same time. So
exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. With this, I would like to conclude the final episode of the Riga Security Forum 2025. I had the pleasure to talk to Aliona Hlivco. She is a Ukrainian-British political scientist and the founder of the St. James Foreign Policy Institute, and Juris Ulmanis, who is a huge supporter to Ukraine and also my brother in arms, and also he's teaching and lecturing, and he's also the author of the book When War is Personal, and I think it is personal to the Balts as it is to Ukrainians and others. So we very much, it's like this, we will show some personality to the Russian military and their aggression to make sure that we restore Europe whole and free with Ukraine in it, inside of NATO and the European Union. This is one of the practical wishes not included in Santa's wish list. So thank you so much.